Hello, right, so here we are. I'm going to just talk about the essays for the Human Emotions module, the second essay. So I need to have several things on the screen at the same time. Just give me a second. Nope, that's not working. Right. Okay, so looking at the second assignment, which is 2,500 words, due in on the 8th of May, you have three choices. Before we kind of get down to the business of the individual essays, let me just say that each of the essays will need to engage in some way with ethnographic literature. So although during the course of the module we've been switching between sociological kind of ideas and anthropological ideas, the balance of evidence that you need to consider in the longer essay needs to have more ethnographic data and evidence in it in support of your arguments, which is one of the reasons it's a longer essay, because when you're using ethnographic data you tend to take up more room than in essays where you're relying more on theoretical arguments or summary sociological data. Good, so having said that, let's take a look at the first of the questions. And I'm looking, the questions are on page, moving my cursor around the screen. Pages, are they not numbered? Diddly-dee, diddly-dee. Well, I think they're on, the document is 19 pages long, your module handbook, and this I believe is on the 17th page, so somewhere near the back you'll find the second assignment questions. And the first one is critically assess the view that shame is a master emotion. Okay, so this is a straightforward kind of essay. Don't see any major intellectual difficulties with it. Let's just focus on the first two words, critically assess. The idea is that you need to either or both and you need to look at evidence which suggests that shame and whatever else that might entail, embarrassment, loss of face, all those things we've looked at which could be defined as shame, critically assess what I would call the dominant view in the social sciences, that shame is in some sense a unique emotion which has a lot of power over the social world, and that it has a unique place amongst the emotions for its social consequences, if you like. This is a view, as we've said in lectures, the idea that shame is a master emotion is one that is, has come to dominate in the social sciences, and a lot of the evidence does tend to suggest that, not only is shame a dominant emotion, it can even come to define whole cultures. So, Ruth Benedict and John Demos and various other people have looked into this and have come to kind of define whole cultures as being dominated by this emotion, sometimes using the language of using phrases like social control and this kind of a thing. I wonder if, in fact, shame is as much of a master emotion as it is claimed to be in these sociologies and anthropologies of life looking into this. Is not pride or guilt or other emotions just as dominating in the social world? You may find that different cultures have different emphases on these things. You may find that there are problems of definition of what constitutes shame, which might come up in your essay, depending on how you want to discuss it. You may actually feel that shame is only one of a number of different kinds of experiences which have similar sovereignty over our behaviour and cultural life. So, all you're meant to do there is to sort of tell us about why shame has been considered to be a master emotion. What does this mean? If you think there are any problems about the definition of shame, and having had a look at some of the evidence, what kind of conclusions you come to as to whether or not shame is a master emotion. I hope that's straightforward. So let's move on then to the second question. Outline the role of ritual in grief and mourning experiences. Critically discuss the effectiveness of ethnographic work in establishing a case for the universality of grief experience. Okay, so this is asking you to do a number of things, but notice again the phrase critically discuss. Again, you will need to locate and discuss evidence about grief, mourning, bereavement, and those kinds of things. Why is this such an important thing? Well, we haven't actually had a lecture yet on grief, but of course death and bereavement is a big part of all cultures. I can say that obviously now, because it marks a specific turning point in everyday experience of the social world. Death doesn't, well, in some cultures it does happen every day, but in other cultures it happens more rarely. But when anyone does die, of course everybody is affected. Everybody's relationships with each other change as a consequence of somebody dying, and so it always tends to attract in any culture a lot of ritual attention, because it's, amongst other things, marking out a ritual passage not only for the person who's died, but also a change in status and a change in experience for the people that are left behind. So you will need to kind of identify ethnographic literature which looks at and into the ritual activity in relation to grief and mourning, of which there's quite a bit you'll find in the reading lists, and there's also some that I'm sending around for discussion at our final seminar. Beth Conklin's work called Consuming Grief. And one of the things you're being asked to discuss in this particular essay is looking at that evidence, looking at the role of ritual in grief and mourning experiences, and in particular looking at the case for there being a universality of the grief experience. Going back to our earlier discussions when introducing the human emotions topic, one of the big outstanding questions for looking at human emotions in general is whether or not human beings who all share similar bodies and so on, and similar physiologies and biological bases of behaviour and neural systems and what have you, whether or not that should lead to a kind of foundational premise within our work, which suggests that there are universal experiences as opposed to locally constructed ones. And of course this is one of the tensions within the social sciences always. To what extent is any experience, any human experience, one that is likely to be universal and shared by all human beings, and to what extent is it a locally constructed experience? Well, clearly within any field of human activity, human emotions, learning, whatever you like, there is going to be some element of universality to it and some element of local construction, social construction going on. Your task therefore is, in looking at grief here, is to also consider then the extent to which, since all people die everywhere and all cultures that have members that die have to respond to that person dying, whether or not the experience of grief is itself a universal experience which we all have, or whether or not it's heavily constructed locally, and it is therefore a social construction. Looking, for example, at the Ilongot, which we've already kind of discussed, they have a very kind of angry response to people dying. We discussed the emotion of ligat in relation to anger, but of course for them that emotion seems to cover things like grief as well. So it's interesting to see if grief is a universal experience which is experienced in the same way everywhere. Anyway, that should be fun for you to sift through the evidence and have a have a discussion with yourself about what you think about that. And finally, critically assess the claim that universally, there's that word again, universally love, jealousy and anger impact on fundamental social bonds. This is the idea that we discussed before Easter, that we could refer to some emotions as dangerous emotions, and they are dangerous, or held to be dangerous, traditionally in the social sciences, because, and notionally among different groups of people as we saw, held to be dangerous because these are the kinds of experiences that people have which lead to the potential to fundamentally break social bonds that are carefully stitched together by the cultures in which they happen. So we looked at the way in which, for example, Hindus regarded romantic love as a dangerous emotion because it kind of breaks up the very delicate, negotiated social bonds and relationships between families and the obligations between marriage arrangements that the way that their culture tends to work. We also looked at sort of forbidden love amongst Bedouin women and that kind of thing, again because the impact of love outside of the nomadic group tends to break up the carefully stitched together social bonds that pertain within it. So that's an opportunity therefore for you to look at a broad range of literature and to ask yourself whether or not we can rely on the idea that universally we can refer to certain emotions as always and everywhere dangerous. Anger, love, joy. And we looked at literature as well, like Catherine Lutz's work amongst the Ifaluk, where we saw that anger can have in fact a constructive role in social life and not merely a destructive one. So you look at your evidence and see what you can kind of determine out of that. Another word I would say about all of the essays is that although you've got 3 essays there which appear to want to draw on ethnographic literature from each of the sections as listed in the programme handbook, topics B, C and D, there is nothing to stop you using material, if you think it's relevant, from different topic areas in order to discuss your question. So for example, as we looked at the question of shame, it may well overlap, or the question of anger may well amongst the Ilongot will overlap with the discussion of grief, that normally comes up under topic D. So you can be sort of more freewheeling. Well, no, freewheeling is not the right word, but you know what I mean. You can be more Catholic, if you like, with your choice of literature from each of the topic areas, if you feel there's evidence there which enables you to discuss the problems of definition of emotion, the problems of interpreting ethnographic evidence, and so on. The other point I would make is when you're being critically assessing the evidence in support of your answers, do bear in mind that to critically assess, you can compare and contrast evidence. You can also look at other critical literature which criticises that evidence. You can also look at the methodological problems and issues which pertain to particular ethnographies. So, it's not only, the kind of theoretical or the direct ethnographic description that that can be criticised, but also the methodologies of the ethnographer and so on. So, you have lots there to discuss. I will set up a discussion forum on Blackboard so that you can ask any further questions you might need to ask that everybody else can see the answers to on what I've just said about these essays. I will try and check that discussion forum every couple of days or so, and I hope that should clear up any issues or difficulties you might have with setting about the essays, and I'm sure the essays will be just as good as the ones you did for your review paper. So, good, thank you very much. I now need to get out of this. See where we've got to. Good, how do I turn it off?